the forehead. Hopefully, the forehead snake does not fail me. The mouth is very, like, deformed Phantom of the Opera. Why? It's like the Phantom of the Opera's bad side. What is this mouth?
Hey guys! Welcome to the channel. It's already a day after Halloween once it's posted, but here's how I made the frontman's mask from Squid Game. So let's get into it. To make this, I use a mask, some cardboard from shopping bags, paper clay, black and silver paint, hot glue, regular glue, baby powder, and a mesh cloth. You don't need all of these, but I'll specify some alternatives later on. I searched up the photo of the mask online. I thought the nose of the mask went too high, so I tried to sand it down. Very important side note, this mask that I bought is a paper mask. It's basically paper mache, so it can be sanded. But be very careful when it comes to plastic masks, since plastic dust is a lot more dangerous. Another big plus of a paper mask is that I can draw on it with a pencil, and erasers even work on it, so I'm able to sketch out the mask and what it looks like onto the actual surface. While I'm sketching, let me tell you a little backstory. This mask isn't for me. My dad actually commissioned me to make this mask for him for a work event. I made this around the week of September 27 to October 1 and had to have it done by October 2. My dad asked me on the 27th if I could make him the mask, and I said sure. I'm used to rush projects anyway, but that's usually when I'm a lot more free. So I had to use my night work sessions to finish this mask in a week while still passing my ACAD stuff and attending class. Somehow, I managed to make it in 4 days, working 3 to 4 hours a day. I only sketched out the nose area at this point. I didn't have any idea how I was going to make the rest of the mask. I only had a concept of using cardboard for the geometric shapes, which I've done before when I made my own Aizawa goggles from My Hero Academia, but that's another story. I'm starting on the nose bridge, which is a lot flatter and wider than the nose on this mask. So I take an old shopping bag and I lay that over the nose. I measure the base and top of the nose to see how big I'd have to make it. I keep going back and forth to measure and trim the shape to size. Even if I could just stick the nose part into place, there was only so much holding onto it when I placed it on the thin nose bridge. Thinking the cardboard might be a little bit too time-consuming, I bring out my paper clay in hopes of maybe sculpt the entire mask out of it. Remember, this entire project has zero prep, and I was just going with materials I already had and basically winging the entire process since I had to finish it as soon as I could. I try to use my ruler to flatten the clay, and try to make it a flat nose bridge. I was trying to use this nose as a proof of concept if I'm able to sculpt the mask out of it. I was able to pinch the clay so the right side had a more defined edge. It took me so long to work on it that I needed some baby wipes to prevent my clay from drying out. I was doing my best to ensure that both sides are as even as I can make them. While trying to make the crisp edges, I realized that doing this would just make the middle dip down and I wouldn't be able to get the flat surface I need. But the wider area made by the sculpted clay was a perfect base to lay the cardboard on since it's already the same shape. I take some regular white glue and stick that cardboard to the clay. I stick more clay nearer to the cheek area to help blend out the clay to the rest of the mask. The entire process of the nose and eye area was the most time-consuming of all the parts since it needed to work on the different angles of the face. But for the entire mask, it's just a bunch of measuring and trimming cardboard. The slightly dry but still flexible clay on the nose allowed me to push the pieces around to make them fit better if their base or that shape isn't that good. For both sides of the face, I try to make one side then just mirror the shape on the other side then do the necessary adjustments. The side pieces are made the same, just stuck on with white glue. The back of the nose bridge behind the cardboard was empty, so I fill in that empty space with some clay. You don't really need the clay if you don't have it, I just like filling in the spaces for a stronger mask. The connector to the forehead is just gonna skip over a pretty big gap to make it in line with where it needs to go, so I give it enough of a base with the clay to keep it in line. The original mask has this forehead ridge around the eyebrow level, so I wanted to figure out how to make that. You could just glue the cardboard against each other to make something like a tent, then glue that to the mask. But for my spur-of-the-moment decision, I add a snake of clay to the forehead. To make it stick, I flatten the edges to the mask. So the main functions of this is to prevent the pieces from collapsing if weight is placed on them. So think about it like a tent, but the tent pole is just really long, so when the weight is placed on top of it, it doesn't collapse on itself. I used white glue to stick it so it kept popping off, so I used some masking tape to hold the pieces in place while the glue dries. The rest of the pieces take a long time to dry since I'm using white glue, so I sketched out the mouth part until the lower cheek according to the lines on the original. This is basically the rush job I can do in a few days, but not the screen accurate one in terms of the shapes and lines considering this mask is wider to accommodate a larger person's face. So I just tried to emulate the original mask as much as I can, but I had to make a lot of different sacrifices just to make sure that it fits within the mask and it also works within my time frame. When I think the pieces are dry enough, I start working on the eye area. The eye holes on this mask is huge compared to the ones from the show, so I'm using this cardboard to cover up parts of the eye holes to make them look smaller. To make the steps faster, I resort to the estimate then trim technique. This does make the process easier since I wouldn't have to measure, but it does lead to the whole thing not being symmetrical. Right now, I'm making sure that the angle is sharp enough but also not so tall that I could still see, and then mirror that shape on the other side. A big issue I came across was that the clay wasn't even on both sides, so I had to compensate in some parts. While those two dry, I take 2 balls of clay as equal as I can get them, then stick them onto the cheeks of the mask. This to make the prominent cheek bumps. This will act like the forehead ridge, giving the cardboard something to lean on so it doesn't collapse when pressed on, which might be a big problem when painting. I estimate the height of the cardboard leaning on it to make sure that it goes far forward as the forehead piece. When I make the 2 small pieces for the cheeks, I had to resculpt them and make them lean on the right way, making space for the wider pieces to come. Since those pieces would hold a lot more weight, I leave the clay to dry. Day 2, I start by making the connecting piece of the smallest triangle in the cheek bump. It's part of the shapes composing the eye, so I have to make sure that it fits properly while also being the right shape to make the cheek bump. The eye also has another minor bump running down the eye. In the original, it's actually connected to the second triangle, but I thought the mask was wide enough and I didn't want to emphasize the wideness even more, so I made that ridge and made it go straight down. Having that snake of clay by the eye gives me a bit more perspective of all the overlapping pieces and how big I should make them. When it comes to sticking the cheek pieces, it takes a lot, since I have to kind of curve them around the dried clay instead of just leaning them against each other, so the tape is very useful. I have to bounce between different places of the mask since the white glue takes so long to dry. Now I have a proof of concept of the clay on the forehead being a good support structure for the forehead ridge. I can start adding the rest of the cardboard parts. I have to add a connector piece from the nose to the forehead, which helps create the top part of the new eye hole shape. I need to position it very carefully since it only has a small part of the actual shape touching the support clay, so it stays up and becomes part of the ridge. While making parts around the eye, I have to keep lifting it to make sure that I can still see out of the eye holes. I have to slowly curve it around the eye socket. I also add some clay in that deeper part of the eye socket to give the cardboard more to stand on. As much as possible, I want to create a ramp for the cardboard instead of just placing it like a tent pole. I'm supposed to let the clay dry then add the cardboard, but I don't have enough time to do that since the measuring and the gluing process takes a lot of time. When the pieces are on, I have to tape them in place to prevent them from popping back up. I only glued the top part of the cheek so I can add some more clay inside for support. Then after that, I get some cardboard and finish up the cheek bumps. It's the usual estimate and trim tactic for this one. The hard part is making sure that it fits the bottom of the clay mound while also narrow enough to make the top point of the cheek. And as usual, to help it curve along the edges of the cheek bump, I have to tape the cardboard in place until it fully dries. I already have the forehead part cut, so I just mirror that and stick it onto the forehead ridge. To prevent a drastic change in height when connecting to the other forehead pieces, I make another paper clay support. At this point in time, I knew that using my usual white glue was going to take too long because I have to keep jumping to different parts as one section dries. So time for the quick and easy solution, hot glue. I placed some cardboard under the glue gun so I wouldn't damage my table. And now I can speed up the process significantly since I don't need to wait that long for the glue to set and no tape needed since I could just hold it in place. You guys can just use the glue gun from the start if you already have it. Since I would need to manipulate the shape a lot, I pry off the bottom cheek piece and use hot glue on that too. I also re-glue the opposite forehead piece. I've burned my fingers on hot glue before, so be careful. I use a glue stick to press the cardboard pieces because I know how likely the glue is to squeeze out between the edges. Since the cheek bump is done, I now have a size reference for the other pieces, so I make another portion of the lower eye. It had to create a dip while it was connected to the cheek bump, but also make it go up on the clay on the end of the eye hole but still connect to the same point as the cheek bump on the bottom, so that would need a lot of adjusting. I also used the hot glue to give it a little bit more support to the shape, but adding more in certain areas. Since I have a bunch of cardboard pieces sticking up over the eye hole, I wanted to make sure that I wouldn't poke the wearer's eye or one of them would fold over. So I go inside the mask and add some hot glue to the back of the cardboard to fuse the new eye shape together. It should give them a little bit more support against folding. Be super careful when doing this step since I was holding the pieces together while gluing and the glue can seep through the seams and burn your fingers. Make sure you know what you're doing when you attempt this. I highly suggest using an extra glue stick to hold it in place if you're not sure about where your hands are or you're scared of it getting burnt. I wanted to correct my original drawing, so I erased my previous sketch and make a new one. Remember, I can only do this because this mask is made out of paper. I only need to draw on one side because I can just mirror the cardboard parts. There's no real way to show this, but I'm working on a piece on the bottom of the nose which is supposed to be the same width as the nose bridge. Nothing really special about the application in this one, it just deals with smaller pieces. The side pieces also have to curve up to match the endpoints of the other cardboard. This was the time I made the decision that the mouth area would just be flat, with none of the ridges and bumps that I made for the rest of the face. It just took too long to make. If you have the time, sure, by all means, make it as accurate as you can. But for building this in the limited time that I had to make some sacrifices for the sake of time. The connector from the nose to the top of the lips is actually curved, and it goes from under the nose, takes a turn to the top lip. The mouth part is going to be inset for this one instead of the geometric lips from the original, since people also have to speak. Because of all the curves that happen around the mouth area, the pieces have to be smaller to accommodate. For some empty areas that I couldn't really get clay into, I just used the nozzle of the glue gun to fill in that area. I used the clay really sparingly here since I don't need to create the ridges. There's nothing really notable about the pieces except that they're small and more flat, so I'm just gonna speed through these parts. It's just like working on a puzzle, but while you're solving the puzzle, you're also making the puzzle. So by the end of day 2, I had the main parts of the mouth and nose done. Day 3 is when I finish up the main part of the mask. I had to bring out some clay since I had to counter the curve of the mask to place that side piece. I just need to complete the front part of the face, which means I finally need to work on the end of the eye hole. I need to make sure that it connects to the cheek pieces while also forming the end of the new eye shape and connecting that to the top part of the eye. A lot of people look more at the forehead than the mouth area anyway. I wanted to keep a semblance of the ridges with the forehead part. So there's some clay in that area to help it connect better to the previous parts. I keep the ridged area only until the line made by the forehead ridge, so it would be enough to see, but not too much that I need another day to make it. When making it, I had to add some clay to the bottom of the top ridge to give it more support since I didn't want it to collapse if the mask accidentally gets dropped. After the top part, I make the rest of them connect to the ridges but keep them as flat as possible since these are the parts that are going to be hidden from view, especially if you're wearing a hood. I have to use a combination of the clay and hot glue to make sure that they connect smoothly because of the very round forehead of the mask. So yeah, I'm just gonna form the rest of it. Once I reach the eye area, I'm switching to a way easier way to cover the sides. I just take the width of the last piece on that side and extend it until the edge. The mask is really wide, but I couldn't cut it since that would make the garter holding the mask onto your face useless. So I just had to deal with the shape. And then I just keep cutting and gluing rectangles until I cover all the edges, trimming the sides of the mask as I go. I clean up my table a little bit and now to prime the surface. The cardboard I use isn't the usual brown cardboard that you get in appliance boxes, but the cardboard used in shopping bags, so it has this glossy coating, which makes painting it super difficult. Those of you who have seen my other crafting videos before know that my most favorite thing to do is my special mixture of glue and baby powder, which I'll just refer to as my magic mixture. Some of you might be wondering why I mix the baby powder in for a primer. Well, I found that sometimes just painting over dry glue is a bit too smooth for the paint to adhere well. The addition of the powder gives it a little bit more texture for paint later on while still drying smooth. I actually mix it with a little bit more powder than I usually would for a primer. Since I was coating the entire mask anyway, I could use the more solid properties of the mixture to fill in the holes between the panels, which doesn't only make the piece feel smoother, be easier to paint and look more professional, but it also fuses together the pieces of cardboard, leading to a stronger prop overall. The next day, the magic mixture is dry and ready to paint. I usually add at least 2 coats of priming, but I didn't have another day to let it dry. So the mask here only has 1 coat of primer. The mask in the show is a gunmetal color that is a bit reflective. I'm trying to emulate that by mixing in some silver paint in with black. I wanted to make sure that the silver parts are seen as possible, so I add a lot of silver. Because it's already been primed, the black paint is actually pretty opaque on the first coat. I just paint the entire mask 1 color. I purposely don't add highlights in the mask. I don't want to paint some parts lighter or darker because I want to retain that metallic shift when you turn your head, which I think is a really important part of the original mask since it gives it that mystery. I also think it could make the overall piece look cheaper than it is because of the effort to make it look 3D makes it look more flat instead. It might look 3D from the front, but once you turn your head, the illusion's all over. Nearing the end, I also add a bit more of that silver paint to make it look even more metallic. If you have gaps, make sure to paint those as well. The black paint should disguise the holes. Since this is going to be used for an online meeting, I have to make some adjustments since I can't add words in post-production. So I take my cutter and split the lips of the mask and curl them inward to make sure sound comes out. I paint the cut edges with the black paint so the white paper exposed blends in with the rest of the mask. I even paint part of the inside just to make sure it's covered. At this point, the eye holes are significantly smaller than they were, but you can still see the person through them, and you can't do that in the original. So I have these hand stocking thingies that I found at my house. You can use old stockings with runs in them if you have those. You don't really need to do this step because I think once you have the mask, people will get the message, but this is just me being extra. You need something that obscures the eyes but still allows you to see. Nothing really fancy to add this one, I just measure and cut the pieces I need. They're still stitched at the side since I wanted the double layer so it covers the area as much as possible. The best way I found to attach it would be a glue gun. I adjust the mesh so it doesn't overlap and stick the glue gun through the holes and start adding glue, touching the mask and slowly moving your way up. I use the spare glue stick to push the mesh into the mask. The forehead space on this mask is huge, so I can just messily place glue all the way up to ensure a secure fit. I add glue on every corner and make sure it's most secure on the top and bottom while also making sure that the glue dots don't poke the face of anyone wearing it. Instead of adding the glue on the side, it was a lot easier to put the glue inside the holes of the mesh to make sure it's not gonna fray or unstick itself. I do that on the opposite side, doing my best to minimize the stringing. And once I have that attached, the mask is done. I hope you guys enjoyed this new craft. This wasn't really something that I'm gonna use myself, but it's still been pretty fun to walk you guys through it now that I made it. Any stuff you guys want to see me make, leave them in the comments below. If you found this video interesting, hit the like button, and if you want to see more videos like this from me, then hit the subscribe button and the bell to know when a new video is out. I try to upload every week, Monday nights at 8. I guess that's all for this video. Bye guys!